Hello, everybody. I am the proactive caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. Because if you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. So, today I want to talk to you about navigating the caregiver journey and what it may look like when the journey kind of shifts towards the end phases. Many caregivers are capable of managing care in their home, but eventually things change and we need a little bit more help for our loved ones, especially when our loved ones begin to need more of that palliative type of care. Like me, many caregivers are learning on the fly. And so those resources we find in the beginning, in the early stages, seem to become more and more sparse towards the end phases. And then the question, at least one of my main question comes up is, who can I trust to help me navigate such emotional challenges and the difficulties that arise towards those end phases? Considering the way our systems are designed now, the question of trust is big. So today I asked Dura Sims to join me to share her story as both the professional and family caregiver. Dura is a native Texan who was born in San Antonio, yet works in the greater Austin area. But earlier this year, Dura had to return back home to Bulverde, Texas, to take care of her mother who has declining health. Thankfully, Dura's background consists of over 30 years in healthcare and is also considered an expert in the field of senior care solutions for just about every stage of life. Dura serves as a clinical care navigator with True Heart Hospice. She's also a facilitator of the Caregiving Cafe support group, and in 2024, so proud of her, will be starting a senior life planning consulting business. She has been very instrumental in assisting seniors to find safe, viable living options, both on the physical and mental, and also on the financial side of it. She works closely with family members to help determine what their best choices are based off of each individual situation. But she never hesitates to tell her clients that being a family advisor and clinical care navigator is the most fulfilling career she has ever had, and how much she actually loves doing what she does. So Dura, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit more and hopefully serve the greater population of caregivers out there through our conversation.
Absolutely, and that is always the goal, helping the greater population for caregivers. And this is one thing that I felt, just to get started. Dura and I met at a caregiver workshop. And as we started to share our stories, it was interesting to see the parallels. But one of the things that you had mentioned that really caught my attention was, as you described your caregiving journey, you had mentioned how you are now watching your mother die again. And I thought, again, wow, that's hard. Um, I know family dynamics is an issue for many caregivers. So, can you share a little bit about how you came to this caregiving role for your mother and the idea of having to watch her die again, basically.
And I'm going to do my best to get through this without being emotional or tears. But as you know from our very first meeting, where
Absolutely.
we were talking about both of our stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was all I could do to keep it together and not have tears. And it's really, when you talk about family dynamics, and I don't think I'm an oddity. I think there are probably more families like mine
Mm-hmm.
than there aren't,
Right.
where you've gone a different direction and relationships faltered and families, and that's what happened with my family. And about 15 years ago, my mother and I actually had a falling out,
Mm-hmm.
and we did not speak to each other. We hadn't spoken to each other. It was shortly after my father's passing. And so for years,
Mm-hmm.
when people would ask me about my parents, I would just say my parents passed, because it was easier than to have to get into
Right.
the discussion as to why we were no longer having a relationship between my mother and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I find now in this situation, because I'm a professional caregiver, so to speak, working in hospice as a clinical care navigator, I talk to families all the time that are in situations similar to mine, and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the same story or the same reason why their relationships fell apart, but they have family dynamics that are so challenged that they're not able to find forgiveness in their heart for the person who's passing. And oftentimes, in my world in hospice, that is one of the reasons why somebody can't pass, is
Right.
there are these unresolved issues. And so I found myself daily talking to people for years about the need to forgive their loved ones, how it can help them, how it can help the person who's passing. And then I find myself in this situation 15 years, after my mom and I haven't talked. And to me, for all intents and purposes, she was dead. I,
Mm-hmm.
I, I mentally buried her. That,
Right.
when, 15 years ago, hadn't spoken to her or had a relationship with her. Now all of a sudden she's at the tail end of her life, and my sister reaches out to me and expresses help. She needs help. She doesn't know how to do this.
Mm.
And that's where most caregivers find themselves, right? They
Right.
find themselves suddenly in a place where you go from being a daughter or a spouse or a, whatever it is, a child, male, female, whatever it is, you go from that normal road that you're walking down in life to all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden you're a caregiver,
Yep.
or you find out the person you love has, or the person that you don't love, that was in my situation, has a disease that is causing them to decline to the point that they're no longer able to take care of themselves.
Right.
We're not born into caregiving roles. We don't have classes in school. Unfortunately, I
We
wish we
sure
did.
don't.
We
Yeah.
don't have classes in schools that teach us how to go from transition from being whatever you were to a caregiver. And that's the hardest part. And when you get a diagnosis, when somebody gets a diagnosis, whatever that diagnosis is, that's it. That's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get well wishes and you get sent on your way to
Yep.
wonder, what do we do next? And so my sister found herself in that place. And not knowing healthcare, not working in healthcare or anything else. And she said, Mom wants to see you. Mom
Mm-hmm.
wants to and I need your help. So I found myself then in a quandary, right? What do I do with this? This is somebody who I felt had very strong negative reactions to. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like wasn't there necessarily for me when I needed a parent, and now I'm expected to step in and
Yep.
provide care and support when I didn't feel that that was something I was afforded. So I really prayed. I prayed very long, very hard, and I had to figure out what was the right next step for me. And then how do I move forward helping somebody who essentially in my heart and my mind was had already passed.
Mm.
And it brought me back to what I do professionally. And I thought, I talk to families every single day about this
Right.
exact situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I do it with such conviction. I do it with the belief that these are the steps that you take.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that we have in place as a society to take care of your loved ones. These are the affordability issues. And I believed wholeheartedly in everything I did, but now it's me. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
my life, right? What do I do? And I thought, I can't tell people and have a good conscience when I'm saying give forgiveness if I can't do that myself. So that
Right.
was the first step that I had to, or not even step, that was the first hurdle that I had to
Mm-hmm.
face in becoming a caregiver. Not a professional caregiver, not a paid caregiver. And I feel like
Right.
it's important to say that there's a difference, right? There are paid caregivers, and then there are caregivers that are normal, everyday people that are teachers and doctors and lawyers, stay-at-home moms, children there that have never been trained or experienced, and they're not getting paid to take care of somebody, but now they're stepping into a role that
Right.
life put them in.
Exactly.
And here I was now in this role. In the first few weeks, really few months of meeting my mom again. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
say meeting my mom because at this stage it's a different person. She's not
Mm-hmm.
the person that she was when she was healthy.
Right.
That walked away from a relationship. This is a person now who needs help and needs support and needs care. And I'm trained in how to do that from a professional standpoint. I'm
Right.
trained in how to do that. But from a personal perspective, it was a whole new bag of challenges for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm happy to say that in this process, one of the things I can genuinely look people in the eyes right now and say to them, no matter how hurt you were, no matter how angry you were, no matter how much you swore you didn't care what happened to that person, the greatest gift you can give yourself is helping that person when they have nobody else to help them. Because I had to learn to relove my mom.
Mm.
I had to learn to unbury the dead
Right.
and then find a way to take care of her with compassion and love that I would give any stranger or somebody who didn't hurt me,
Right.
right? I
Right.
had to come from a different place. I had to unbury my mom and bury the hurt.
Right.
It's two different things. And then I had to do it with the knowledge that as I'm learning to love her with compassion and take care of her and seeing her in such a vulnerable situation, that I'm going to have to bury her again. But this
Yeah.
time I'm going to have to bury her from a place of love, and it's really going to hurt. It
Mm-hmm.
probably hurt before, but when you're full of anger, you don't feel that
Right.
hurt. You just
So
feel
true.
the cushion. But all that anger, all that bitterness, it's gone. I truly
Mm.
love her as a mom. I haven't called her mom in over 15 years.
Wow.
Um, and I call her mom now, and I truly love her.
Mm.
But that's a hurdle that I'm coming across right now too, right? Because now I know when I bury her this time, it's a different burial, and it's a burial that's going to really hurt, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also been a gift. It's a gift and it's a blessing for me to be able to be there and see her at this phase in her life and help her at this phase in her life.
You truly have had to navigate this journey. I mean, separate. I like the way you posed that. You had the professional approach to it, but you're still human. And so the personal side of it is still very messy and hard to navigate in itself. But I'm glad you guys that you are there for her and you are able to experience this now, because the as odd as it sounds and as painful sometimes as it feels, I think these are the things in life that even as caregivers we kind of have to experience, because now at this point you're in a better space than you were before. But it brings these challenges of navigating the care, because one other thing that I found very interesting is that you are still in the field, you're still the professional that works in that hospice industry. And as a family caregiver now you're on the same end of where you're needing that care for your mother. And you were met with challenges of trying to fulfill her needs.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about how challenging that was to navigate for your mother?
Sure. So when I started our conversation, I said I was full of conviction and belief
Mm-hmm.
in everything that I told family members and caregivers alike that we had out there as a way to navigate the healthcare journey or the declining health of the person you're taking care of. Truly believed wholeheartedly in the system and everything that was there. And then I come into it in a different role, and I am so lucky by God's grace. I come into this with knowledge of how
Right.
to have conversations that most people don't have. And even in that situation, even with my knowledge and my coworkers and friends that are in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
even with that support, I still daily find myself having to be an advocate first and foremost for my mom, and finding that the things that I thought were there to support you truly. And I don't want this to sound negative, right? Because it
Right.
is the system that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want people to throw their hands up and just be so exacerbated that they say, I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But there are moments where you sit back and you go, I can't do this anymore. And so this understanding the continuum of care, I think, is so important for people to grasp early on, that there's a time when you're healthy, there's a time
Mm-hmm.
when you're not, and then there are choices that happen when you're no longer healthy and able to take care of yourself. And those choices are independent living
Right.
as an option with support of non-medical care, which is referred to as custodial care. It could be assisted living, it could be memory care, it could be skilled nursing. It's a
Mm-hmm.
hospital setting, but when do you leave the hospital setting and where do you go from there? And when do
Right.
you get home? Or why would I go with hospice? There's all these questions that are just ambiguous and floating around
Mm-hmm.
people, and nobody, unless you've just had to experience it, you really don't understand what all that looks like and what all that means. And there's not a true guiding force or direction if you don't have people that understand it willing to step in. And so on in my situation with my mom, it was like most people do. They hear the word hospice
Yeah.
and they push back. Oh no, I don't want that. I'm not dying right now.
Right.
And I'm coming into this relationship having not had a relationship in so long. And to bring up the word hospice and already have that mistrust that was there for so many years, it's like, oh, you want me to die. And so there's a whole component of understanding and educating what each thing is, and that's for another day. I don't think we have the time to get into everything, and what all the different levels of care are. But what I can say is that I've had to pull my mom out of a skilled nursing facility against medical advice because what I thought was there to help her and to give her the support was appeared to be neglectful. I'm not saying they were, but there was the appearance of it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I wasn't comfortable leaving her in that environment. So now what? If you're
Right.
not comfortable, discharged from a hospital, and the environment that is the next step doesn't work for you, doesn't work for your family, then what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we chose to bring her home, and have custodial care. There's the other problem, right? That most
Mm-hmm.
people find themselves in because that's not free and it's not cheap. Getting old and
Mm.
getting sick, you would think those are the two things you could do for free in life because they're just
You
going
would
to happen.
think.
But they are the most expensive concepts and reality of people's lives, because if you haven't didn't have the foresight to get long-term care insurance, or to have you know a good support system in place for you, there are so
Right.
many people that find themselves where they're, now what do I
Mm-hmm.
do when I'm bedbound? What do I do
Unfortunately.
when I can't take care of myself anymore and I don't have $14,000 to spend every month on private care?
Right.
What do you do? Um, you know, My greatest advice would be find somebody like myself, which is like I said, I'll be doing in the new year.
Mm-hmm.
Have somebody who is knowledgeable about all options of care and when it's a good time to use one versus another, meaning
Yes.
skill assisted, whatever. Find somebody who can help you navigate that system. Um, and there are paid people who can do that. There are non-paid, there's support groups, there's things like what you're doing. Not everybody has money to put towards finding the help that they need for their family members. There is still help out there. Reach out, reach out and start looking for the people who can help you navigate, and then do
Yes.
the best you can and give yourself grace as a caregiver, and understand that every step of this way, no matter if you've made a mistake or you've done something above and beyond fabulous, you did the best you could in the moment with the tools that you had. But
Absolutely.
make a commitment to keep gathering more tools. That's what's going to make you the best caregiver for the person that you love. Gather more tools and more people. The more people
Right.
you have in your corner and your support, the more people you talk to, you're going to find how there are so many people out there. You're not the only one. There's so many of us out there. And if we come together and we start to share our story, go to the Capitol and get do situations like you and I are doing right now,
Right.
whatever you can to bring awareness to the fact that there are people who are like you and me, middle
Right.
class people, worked every day of their lives to pay into the system, and now they find themselves just above the income level, so they don't
Mm-hmm.
qualify for Medicaid, but
Right.
not financially secure enough to have the pay for the private caregivers and the assisted livings and the other stuff out there. What about those people? What
Yeah.
about me?
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Where
so
do we
true.
go from there? And that awareness and being vocal. That's where change comes from.
Well, and it's such a challenge because you get to the point where you gradually become this caregiver, and then you're gradually in these new phases of the journey, and you're continually going, now what? Okay, this. And then now what? And then this. Okay, now what? And there's usually an answer as you go along the journey, but what I find very challenging is that when we reach this point of needing the higher level of care and we look at Medicare, what can we do with Medicare? What's the supplemental? What's this? How can we find some support financially? It was really hard not to see this in a very cynical way, thinking, oh, the system is designed in such a way that it really limits the use of it. I mean, they tell you as a working person that you are eligible. Your plan, I can't even remember off the top of my head, plan B is covered because of 10 years of working or something. I mean, and then when it comes time for you to actually use this, oh, you actually make just too much income. So you can only get so much covered. And so the caregiver is in this situation again. Well, now what? How do I get help? And so we're falling on home health services and hospice services and then trying to figure out what's covered through Medicare and what isn't, and how do we afford it if it's not covered.
I've heard so many times in healthcare, and have said it myself. The system, the way that it's designed, Medicare, Medicaid, insurance, billing, all of that stuff is designed so that the good guys can't be the good guys,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
You in healthcare, you want to step in and you want to do what you know needs to be done, but you're limited by what you can do, by what Medicare says you can do, by what
Right.
insurance says you can do, by what you know, the system says you can be sent home with. Well, you can go to a skilled nursing facility, but you can't go home and have caregivers.
Yeah.
Well, you can be treated for acute care issues, but we're not going to treat you all the way until you're healthy from a hospital. We're going to send you to another environment to clear out that space and make more room. And
Yeah.
that's the challenge, right? So how do we treat people and not a disease? How do we
Right.
treat people as humans and not a number, whether that's a code for billing or
Right.
a dollar amount, whatever that is? We've got to get healthcare back in a place of looking at people as people and treating
Exactly.
people for someone who's sick is not their disease. Someone who's dying is not their diagnosis. They're still a human being in
Mm-hmm.
that body, a
Right.
human being with feelings and needs and compassion. And if we can take away the cynicism that you see so often in a overburdened caregiving world,
Yeah.
um, by overburdened I mean so much need and not enough staff.
Right.
And so you see people who they're are overwhelmed in what to do and how to do it, and they're limited in what they can do. We've got to find a way to get our healthcare system back so that we can take care of everybody. There shouldn't be
Right.
this. There shouldn't be this these people down here, and on the spectrum down here is what I mean by that. On the spectrum of finance, of affordability of care, Medicaid, and there shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be people up here that are so well off that they have everything and they don't experience the pains that the rest of us experience.
Yeah.
There's this whole gap in the middle for people like you and me that fall in there and don't have the resources. So the solution, I never like to talk about a problem without trying to find a solution, and it's not ideal, but there are ways to try to provide care for your loved one that is more feasible and more affordable if you find yourself in the greater gap
Mm-hmm.
that we are a lot so many of us are in. What I'm doing personally is we pay for private caregivers in the morning, we pay for private caregivers in the evening to break that up, and then which my mom's on hospice. And so hospice is, of course, covered and paid for through your Medicare, Medicaid benefit.
Right.
And it covers the cost of medical equipment. It covers the cost of medications that are prescribed by the hospice. You
Mm-hmm.
get certified nurses' aides to come in and help with the activities of daily living, from
Right.
bathing and showering, nurses to help with medication management and changes in event changes as they occur in your health, overseen by a medical director, a social worker to help with end of life care planning, a spiritual care coordinator to help with those challenges that I found myself facing,
Right.
right?
Definitely.
So
Especially
have
those.
this beautiful team of people that come in and support you. And hospice is not about dying. It is, but that's what we do in the last 15 minutes of a person's life
Right.
is the dying process. Hospice is about living. How do we help you live successfully
Mm-hmm.
while you still have a life to live? How do we help your family navigate this very challenging world of healthcare? How do we let you grieve appropriately when the time comes? That's what hospice is. And
Right.
hospice is a benefit that is paid for, but most people don't realize it's paid for it out just like Social Security. As a working American, you have money that is taken out of your check and it's put into your hospice bucket. Now, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times I meet with people and they say, well, I don't want hospice. I'm not dying. I just want my money out of the bucket. It doesn't work that way. It's
No,
a
it
use it
doesn't.
or lose it benefit. But that is your money that should be used for your care. So use it. Don't let a word and what you believe that word means stop you from the benefit of what you've worked hard for. And that is to have people in place to take care of you at the end of your life,
Yeah.
however long that end of life is. It could be a day, it could be 6 months, it could be longer. However long
Absolutely.
that end of life appears, use your benefit and let it supplement care in between, like I'm doing, because that's what's helping us keep it together. And if you don't have the opportunity, the ability, the financial resources to get those caregivers, sometimes that's your only option. And hospice can also provide
Oh,
respite care where you're
definitely.
goes into a facility setting where they have care for their needs, but you have a mental health break. And that's important. As a caregiver, you have got to have a mental health break. You've got to take care of yourself because that's the other thing that the healthcare system doesn't take into account is the cost of being a non-paid caregiver on the caregiver. The
Right.
the the missing work. not being able to go to school and stay focused, the health issues that come from depression,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, heart attacks, strokes. More caregivers will pass away before the person they're taking care of,
Yeah.
because they aren't having their needs met. These are all the unspoken truths of where we find ourselves when we become a caregiver. And it's got to be spoken. We got to speak about it. We
Yeah,
got to
we
talk
do.
about it. We have to take care of the caregivers. If we don't, who's going to take care of the person
It's,
that needs help?
and I'm glad you said it and put it that way, because what I'm finding out more and more is that states actually, the time that they consider the unpaid caregiver is when they're building their budgets.
Hmm.
But their budgets don't consider the unpaid caregiver in the care that they need. And the respite care that might be covered through an insurance. I mean, it doesn't make it any easier. It's not self-explanatory. Um, it falls into these very specific buckets of age, 65 and older, Medicare limitations, what is available. And the caregiver that's doing the best they can with the tools they have, they're the ones that are, their health is reducing by the year, that, the months, the weeks, the days as they're caring. And we turn back to the system for help, and the caregiver's the one that suffers.
Hmm. Yeah, and financially too. So many caregivers have to step away from their careers
Yes.
because they're having to take care of their loved one. And what are your options? There
Right.
really aren't a lot of good options out there. So it is step away and take care of your loved one, or who does it? Do they
Right.
stay by themselves? Do um, and those are things that there's not solutions for right now.
No, there's
And
not.
and so as much as I don't want to leave people feeling um downtrodden and like there's not answers to stuff, sometimes we have to acknowledge when there's not an answer. And because that's where we start to say, how can we affect change?
Right.
And to know that there's not an answer right now for the family caregiver who's having to step away from their job because they're not able to do care for their loved one and their job to the degree that they need to, then there's no resources there to help them financially once they lose
Mm-hmm.
that job or give up that job.
Yep.
That's not fair. That's wrong. There
Yeah.
needs to be resources there to support the caregiver, not just in taking care of their loved one, not just paying for custodial care or memory care or assisted living, but a way for that caregiver to supplement the income loss that
Right.
they're having to incur because they are now a full-time caregiver.
Right. Yes, and that's where I was told, well, there's FMLA and there's all these other things that in that arena, but when, especially someone who's living with memory challenges, all the different forms of dementia, which is growing, that's not just a 8 to 12 week kind of thing to manage. That is
No.
several years, and so it's really time for the caregivers to be able to voice their opinions and their pain points and what are their actual needs, which is why when you and I had our conversation, I thought this is interesting because you have both perspectives as the professional caregiver and the family caregiver, and you're still falling into those same kind of cracks that the unpaid family caregiver is faced with. And unless we come forward and express our pain points, then and come forward in the numbers, because you see the numbers, there's 53 million caregivers, and just 5 years ago there was 42 million. And so it's growing very quickly, and they're expecting so much more. And so if we're going to keep growing in numbers of caregivers, then what are we going to start doing to help our caregivers?
Absolutely.
And instead of waiting for Because I know for my mother, reaching out and trying to, when I was told hospice was an option, um, having the same reaction of, no, I'm not dying, I don't want hospice. And then in my mind was like, no, I know you're not dying, but this is an option. If things are covered and financially, then we need to go in this direction. And I think that was, I had to express to her how it would reduce some stress for me to not worry about financially. You can get these medications, you can get these services, and um, but then having the different side of having a really good hospice company and then having a really bad. And so just finding out that information of, so every time a caregiver says, now what? Being able to find a service or company like what you're in the process of building to say, okay, this is, if you're in this area, this is what you can do. And have somewhere to say, this is, it's not that we're alone in this process, it's just finding the others. It's finding each other so that we can connect and not feel so alone in this process.
And recognizing too that is, as much as you feel, and I can say this because I feel the same way, as much as you feel helpless in this journey, you do have areas you can control.
Yes.
And sometimes that's recognizing when you've brought people in who aren't serving you well. Not all hospices are created equal.
Right.
Not all caregiving groups are created equal. So, you know, I found myself in the same situation where it was, okay, you don't want to take the time to interview different companies because everything you're doing is reactive at some stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you come into caregiving and it's due to crisis, not something you've been prepared for, not something you've talked about. And I really wish people would start talking about their life plan when they're healthy, not
Yes.
at the time of crisis. I think so much would be avoided if we destigmatize the concept of death or the concept of ill health or memory issues or any of that stuff. If we start talking about it when we're young and when people are introduced to the concept of continuum of care and all that, I think it would make life so much easier. But what most people find themselves in, including myself, who works in this industry, found myself in a very reactive mode.
Yeah.
And I was discharging my mom from the hospital, pulling her out against medical advice from the skilled nursing facility, figuring out how she's going to be taken care of at home, trying to make sure hospice took her on, but that we don't get other services that are going to negate the hospice benefit. And
right.
And then, trying to come up with a good schedule for caregivers that also balances out the time that she has hospice. I mean, so many personal hours that go into managing her care daily, so many calls from the different groups, from the hospitals to the facilities to the first private caregivers to the hospice caregivers to so many calls that I'm fielding that again, by the grace of God, I know what I'm doing and I'm able to have these conversations and navigate quickly. But for somebody who doesn't have that knowledge or that experience, there's no quick navigation through this process. And it's not an easy process. And so the sooner you start talking about your life plan, and the reality is life ends for everybody.
Yeah.
There's not a single person that's going to get out alive. Not one of us.
My mom would say, no one gets out of here alive.
Nope. And so let's acknowledge it, let's accept it, and let's plan for it, because that's where you can start to then have an idea of, if one group isn't working for you, you do have power over that. You can hire and fire as you choose, but don't do it in the moment that you're in crisis. Be prepared beforehand.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we should all come together and support each other on. Let's talk openly, let's prepare. And I can say I'm in that boat right now. I am not still in a place to be able to have a conversation with my mom about end of life and what does that look like and where are we burying you and let's talk about your finances. So I'm going to be one of those people,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be, after somebody passes, after your loved one passes, trying to patchwork
Yeah.
her life that I wasn't even a part of for 15 years.
Right.
So I have no
Right.
idea what that patchwork looks like. But there, just as with living, there are things you have to do when you're alive to be successful. There's even more that has to happen when you die. and
Yeah.
and
So true.
help your loved one who is taking care of you grieve, so that they can grieve appropriately and not have to be a detective. They don't have to put on the detective hat and now figure
Oh.
out what you had, what you didn't have, what you owe, what is, where do you want to be buried? How do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? I don't know. Why am I guessing these things? Like,
Yeah.
why wasn't this a conversation? Why am I, when I should be having my daughter hat and my grieving cloak on, putting
Exactly.
on my Inspector Clouseau, because that's going to be me. I'm going to be fumbling through it. I am not going to be the genius detective. I'm going to be Inspector Clouseau, fumbling all the way through this process. And it doesn't have to be that way, but
Yeah.
for some it does, right?
I love that you put it that way, because when hospice was introduced to us, I felt like I was able to put back on that hat of daughter once again, but not before then.
Yeah.
So, for our listeners who want to get more information and actually reach out to you to help them in navigating their care journey, how do they find you?
So my cell phone is always the best way to reach me. I answer that phone 24/7, and my number is 830-837-3162. And my email is Dura, Dura, at true, True, heart, Heart, hospice, hospice.com. And I can also be reached at dura.cherie.sims@gmail.com. So either one of those will work. That's dura.cheri.sims@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dara, for sharing a very personal and painful story. But like you said, I'm sure there are other caregivers that will hear your story and feel validated in realizing there are others who are experiencing similar challenges.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Anytime I get the chance to talk to you, I appreciate it. But in
Perfect.
this forum as well, and I hope it reaches a lot of ears, and I hope it makes a difference to even
Yeah,
just one person.
absolutely. That's the goal. So, thank you for tuning in this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know talking about end of life phases is never an easy topic, but like Dura mentioned, it's something that has to be had, and the sooner we have that conversation with our loved ones, the better. I hope this episode gave you more food for thought, and for more information, you can also go to proactivecaregiver.com. So until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.